Hello, you guys. My name is Maggie, and I am from the Weller Center at Lehigh Valley Hospital. So some of you may recognize me from when I came to your schools face-to-face. Some of you may not, and that is perfectly okay. So what the Weller Center does, for those of you who don't know, is we travel to a bunch of different schools in the area and we teach different health programs. So I teach a lot of different things. I teach things like stress, I teach things like depression, puberty, that's always a really fun one. But for you guys today, we are going to be talking about drugs, specifically opioids and heroin. Now this is a really, really big topic. It's a very important one because in recent years, there's been something called an opioid epidemic. So I'm going to talk about what opioids are later on because some of you may not know, but just know right now that opioids are an incredibly addictive drug, and many Americans and even people all around the world have gotten incredibly addicted to them. It's become a huge issue and many people are turning later to heroin. I'll talk about why that is later on. But this has become a true and real epidemic. It's become a serious problem. People's entire lives have been ruined from this addiction, and thousands of people unfortunately have lost their lives to them. So we're going to talk about the dangers of opioids and heroin, what leads to addiction, and the stages of addiction. All right, so let's get started. All right, you guys, so let's start talking about opioids and heroin. So first, let's start off with opioids. Let's define them. What are they? What is an opioid? So a lot of you guys may have heard that word before, but you're not 100% sure on what opioids actually are. Well, opioids are a type of prescription painkiller. So they're used to treat really, really severe pains, like if you get a surgery or you break a bone. Now they are a prescription, so that means you have to see a doctor first. You can't just go to the store and buy an opioid. You have to see a doctor, they have to evaluate you, and then give you that prescription for the opioid. Now, opioids are a type of painkiller, but they're very different from Tylenol and Advil. They're a lot stronger than that. That's why they're used to only treat those really severe pains like when you get a big surgery. So I took an opioid once in my life. It was back when I had my wisdom teeth removed, back when I was in college. Now that was a really painful surgery. After I had my wisdom teeth removed, I was in a lot of serious pain. So my doctor gave me that prescription for the opioid, and I only took it the one day after the surgery just to help with that pain. So opioids can be really useful for those really severe things, like people who get into accidents, people who've broken their back, had surgeries, and they're really good for those things. So you guys may have heard the word opioid before, but you're more likely to recognize some of the brands. So common brands of opioids include things like Percocet, Oxycontin, morphine, and codeine. So Percocet maybe look very familiar to you guys. I know they use the word Percocet in a lot of different songs by rappers and everything. So those are just some popular brands of opioids. So how do they actually work? Well, when you break a bone, for example, so if you broke your knee, that would hurt a lot. So when you break your knee, your body sends messages. It sends messages all the way from your knee to your brain saying, hey, you just broke this bone, that hurts a lot. Your brain is essentially like a receiver, and the broken bone, that message that's being sent, will go right to the receiver in your brain, and then I'll tell you you're in a lot of pain. When you take an opioid, opioids essentially block that receiver in your brain. So the message is still being sent. You still broke your knee, and it probably still hurts, but the opioid is blocking that receiver in your brain, so you can't actually feel it. That's what makes opioids really useful for people who do break bones or people who do get surgery, because they still probably have that pain. Their bone is still broken. They still have that surgery, but the opioid is making your body believe that you can't actually feel it. Well, that sounds great, right? We should just use opioids for everything. Unfortunately, about opioids, there's a big problem with them. Opioids are incredibly addictive. Opioids are actually one of the most addictive prescription painkillers. So a lot of people who take opioids because of a surgery or a broken bone continue taking them long after their injury has healed. So it's kind of like a big cycle. This is happening to thousands of Americans and honestly people all around the world. People break their back in an accident, whether it's a car accident or at work. They get prescribed an opioid because they are in a serious amount of pain. Pretty soon they get addicted to those opioids, and then they continue taking them even after that surgery or that injury has healed. And it's a really big problem. It's actually turned into a huge epidemic. It's called the opioid epidemic because so many people thought they were taking these opioids to help, but it turned out to be a really big problem in the long run because they became addicted. And unfortunately, it does not stop there. So after becoming addicted to opioids, people then switch to heroin. Now, once you become addicted to opioids, you're going to keep taking them every single day. You're going to take multiple opioids a day. And once that injury has healed up, you can't really get opioids from your doctor anymore. They won't give you a prescription. So people turn to street dealers to buy those opioids. They'll go to a dealer on the street and try to buy those pills. But opioids on the street are incredibly expensive. One pill can cost anywhere from $20 to $60. That's a lot. That's a lot for an addiction. And don't forget, you're taking multiple pills a day. Some people can take all the way up to 10 to 20. And that is hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. So what people do once they're addicted to opioids, they switch over to heroin, because heroin is going to make them feel the exact same way. When you take an opioid and when you take heroin, it's going to give you the same high. If anything, heroin is a little bit stronger. So people think, oh, this is going to give me a better high, and it's cheaper. Heroin is pretty cheap on the street. If you try to buy a hit of heroin, it's only going to cost anywhere from $5 to $20. So that's a fraction of what opioids actually cost. So a lot of people, they're becoming addicted to opioids from an injury. They get addicted, they keep taking them, realize, oh wait, this opioid is way too expensive, and they switch over to heroin. About 80% of people who misuse heroin misuse prescription opioids first. So this is a huge problem. It's a big cycle. And so many people got trapped, and it's not because they chose this. It's not like they woke up one morning and just decided, hey, today I'm going to do heroin. It's because they were seriously injured, they got prescribed an opioid, and it just spiraled out of control. So let's talk a little bit more about heroin. So heroin has been around for a really long time. Heroin has been around since the early 1900s. So back then, anytime somebody had a toothache or a headache, they would get prescribed morphine. And morphine is a type of opioid, and it's very addictive, and a lot of people overdose from it. So doctors and inventors back then were like, okay, let's try to invent something else, something that can help with pain, but it's not as addictive. So they came up with this amazing thing called heroin, and it turns out they goofed really, really bad. So heroin became even more addictive than morphine and even more dangerous. Heroin is currently the most addictive substance in the entire world. That means there is nothing more addictive than heroin. People try heroin one single time. They take one hit of heroin once, and they stay addicted their entire lives. And unfortunately, heroin is the most dangerous drug of them all, too. People overdose on heroin every single day. It is so incredibly dangerous. And honestly, think about that addiction to heroin. Do you guys genuinely think it's easy to quit heroin once you're addicted? No, it's not. It is really, really hard. So the outcomes for heroin addiction are not good. Very few people are able to successfully quit using heroin. And unfortunately, because they take it for so long and they get really, really addicted, they end up overdosing one day. All right. So currently in the United States, heroin is completely illegal. It does not matter what state you live in, heroin is illegal to use, it's illegal to buy, and it's illegal to sell. And if you're caught doing any of the three, you can better believe you may end up going to jail for it. There are so many people who are in the prison system because they were associated with heroin. So think about the consequences of heroin. Not only can you ruin your life and end up in jail, but it could even potentially kill you one day in the future. Well, how do people take heroin? Well, there are a couple of ways that they do it. So heroin kind of comes in this powdery form down here. And the three ways that people take heroin, one way is they'll usually smoke it, so they'll put it into a pipe and they'll smoke it that way. They'll inhale it in its powder form, or they'll inject it into their body, and that's usually the most popular one. But it doesn't matter which way you're using heroin, all three of them are equally addictive. So it doesn't matter if you're smoking it, inhaling it, or injecting it, you're very likely to die no matter what way you're using it. Now, unfortunately, it is getting too common for somebody to overdose on opioids and heroin. And I hope you guys, in your lifetime, you never have to see somebody have an overdose. That is a horrible thing for anybody to go through. But unfortunately, it's becoming an everyday occurrence. Thousands and thousands of people die every single year from an opioid and heroin overdose. In 2018, over 46,000 people died from an overdose due to opioids and heroin. That is so many people, and hopefully it is not one of your loved ones, but I want you guys to keep these in mind. God forbid you ever see somebody have an overdose one day. So these are the symptoms of an overdose. The first one, that person is falling asleep or they can't wake up. So you're shaking them, you're shouting their name, and they won't wake up. Next, their pupils look like a pinpoint. So you know the black part of your eye? That is the pupil. And whether you're shining a light on it, that pupil won't grow. It's really, really small. And that's actually one of the first signs that somebody had an overdose. So look at their eye, and if the pupil is super, super tiny, even in the dark, they may very well be having an overdose. Next, their breathing is really slow. It's really shallow. They're not breathing the way that they're supposed to. They may be choking or kind of gurgling. So a lot of times when people have an overdose, they accidentally throw up, but they can't really move. They're flat on their back. So sometimes people may actually choke on their own vomit, which is a horrible thing for anybody to go through. And finally, their skin, their lips, or their fingertips may be really, really pale or even a bluish color. So when somebody is going through an overdose, they're not getting enough oxygen into their body. So their body gets super pale and even turns a little bit blue from that lack of oxygen. Now, if you guys ever see anybody have any of these symptoms, it doesn't even have to be all of them. If you see somebody have any symptoms that are on this list, call 911 right away or tell another adult that's in the room or nearby, because there is a way to save these people. So there is this miracle drug called Narcan. They give it to somebody who has a heroin or an opioid overdose, and it literally brings them back to life. Somebody who's having a heroin overdose looks like they're dead on the ground. But the second the people from the ambulance give them Narcan, they spring back to life. So there is a way to save them. Not all hope is lost. So call 911 as soon as you can, right away, or just tell another adult who's nearby. Okay, and again, I hope you guys never have to see this in your lifetime, but just keep these somewhere in the back of your brain just in case. Alright, you guys, thank you so much for watching. I know this is not the most cheerful topic, but I hope you guys learned a lot. I know this is a really interesting subject, and there is a lot to learn. So please, you guys, in your lifetime, say no to drugs. These things can kill you. Heroin can knock you out with one single dose. So don't ever go near it, because the outcomes are really, really terrible. And if you guys are concerned about somebody in your life having a substance abuse problem, somebody who's addicted to drugs, you can call this hotline here at the bottom. So you can call that and they can help you get some resources to help somebody quit drugs, whether it's yourself or a loved one. Alright, you guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. See you later.